All right, welcome everybody. Thank you guys for coming to another gathering. Today, we're talking with Amy Simon about how to uncover your unique message and reader. And just wanted to welcome you all here, but also introduce Amy because she's been such a sweet encouragement and friend to me. You all probably know her already through various contexts online and also in the writer's block. She's very active in our community, but she was such a help to me in starting this community. And she's so good at asking questions. And I think that's why the Lord uses her in this particular area of getting to know your reader, because if you feel like you're not really sure who your reader is, Amy will probably ask you the questions to help you dig through that. So she's really good at kind of seeing some things that maybe we are not always really clear on ourselves. I think often we suffer from we're too much in the forest to see the trees. And so having that outside person to kind of ask those questions is really, really helpful. And Amy's really good at that. And she's just a good friend and a great helper in the writer's block. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and teaching us today. So today she's going to talk to us about, how we can get to know this ideal reader. We're going to get to know her better as well. And then tomorrow, the same time, same place, she's going to show up and do her solo teaching. So be sure you can, if you can't join us live tomorrow, to be sure to catch the replay. And then she'll also do her live on Thursday in the morning. So we'll talk more about that time a little bit later. So, but Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here, how you got started with writing and where that writing is taking you right now.
Yeah, sure. So I currently live in Wisconsin, a little bit north of Milwaukee, with my husband. We've been married almost 24 years and our 3 kids. We have a sophomore in college, a high school senior, and a 7th grader. So I homeschooled all 3 of them from the beginning through high school. So I'm about to have only one left at home, which is really weird, which is kind of cool, but also really weird. So in addition to writing, I lead the women's ministry at my church, and I run our local homeschool co-op group that meets for classes once a week. I have always loved writing. I never really minded writing papers in school. And as I got older, I found that I was the person who ended up writing the newsletters for different ministries that I was involved in, or fun, creative little stories to entertain my coworkers. It hadn't really occurred to me to pursue writing as a career. My college degree is actually in clarinet performance, which really I haven't really done a whole lot with. I taught private lessons for a while, but yeah, is what it is. After college, I lived in Turkey for a year as a missionary with a college ministry. And then I returned to the States to raise support to be on staff with that ministry full time. But God had other plans, as he frequently does. And I met my now husband while I was raising financial support. And so I married him instead of joining staff full time with that ministry. But then we moved out from Connecticut to Milwaukee after we got married. And he and I both volunteered with that same ministry for many, many years. So once I started having kids, I started having the itch to pursue writing as maybe a source of income. I wanted something to do with my brain while my hands were busy with my kids. So I took some correspondence courses on how to write magazine articles, mostly for kids magazines. So I started doing that. And I had quite a few magazine articles published, usually in Christian teen magazines, and then later in Christian parenting magazines. So that really gave me the confidence that, I could actually do this whole writing thing and even make a little money from it. I also wrote a middle grade historical fiction novel and a nonfiction book about the spiritual lessons that we learn while homeschooling our kids. But I was self-publishing them. I had not the slightest clue really what I was doing. And so, you know, I sold a few copies, but then I ended up taking the novel off of Amazon because there were so many typos. But one day down the road, I will fix it all up and put it back out there. But I kept writing magazine articles until most of those magazines kind of stopped accepting freelance articles, and the door there just seemed to be closing. And about that time, COVID showed up, and life really kind of took some pivots there, and I was really ready to take my writing in a new direction. And so I knew that I needed focus, I needed direction, I didn't know what to do next, I needed community. My kids were getting older and more independent. I could see the end of the homeschooling road coming, even if it's not there yet. And so I really felt like I had more time to invest in my writing. And so I joined a writing community and began to learn what it meant to write for a specific audience with a specific message.
So, wow, you've been all over the place, literally all over the map, all over the world, all over the map, writing wise. You've really kind of done a lot of, it sounds like, little detours in your writing journey, as we all do, right? Where we start and where we are and where we end up are all different places by God's grace. But this whole theme of you finding and really talking to your ideal reader, it sounds to me like that was kind of a pivotal thing for you in your writing. Instead, I mean, you were doing freelance, you were doing fiction, you were doing young adult writing, you were doing adult audiences. But when you really landed on how do I find, were you feeling like in your own heart, like, who am I as a writer? And was that process of learning who and how to find your ideal reader really what changed things for you?
So as I learned about this idea of, oh, we need to have a specific reader and a specific message, I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense, because then I know what in the world I'm trying to accomplish, right? So I spent a lot of time journaling and processing the things in my own life. I looked at my life experiences that I had been through. I grew up in a fairly dysfunctional, non-Christian family. I came to Christ as a young teen, and then learned to grow in my faith. And I had to replace a lot of faulty ways of doing life that I had seen growing up with truth from God's word. And so I tried to take those pieces and experiences, as well as my own strengths and gifts, to see what it was that I had to offer someone else and where I could focus in my writing. I also looked at the other roles that I had and thrived in, like leading my homeschool co-op or teaching or helping women to kind of get to the root of the issues in their lives. And I tried to piece all that together to figure out what it was that I had to offer. I experimented a lot. I laugh at how many times my website completely changed. It still changes, but not as drastically as it did. But I just kind of tried on different possibilities of, you know, what is this? Where do I fit? What's my niche that I fit in, that I have uniquely to offer somebody else? And so going through that process, I finally kind of found the thread that wove through all of those things, which was using journaling and spiritual disciplines to get to the root of the things that we struggle with in our faith, and replacing the lies that we find in our own lives with truth from God's word.
Yeah.
It was a process that I went through to do that in my own life. I thought, well, if I can help someone else, I know I'm not the only person who struggles with this. So if I can help someone else do that same thing, that would be great. And then it has since kind of expanded to include helping writers to figure out where they fit and what the message is that they have to offer others. Because I found that, and that usually involves journaling. It's kind of a theme.
It's interesting too, because I think that, like, what you're saying is kind of reminding me some of my process, that finding your ideal reader is really often about a self-discovery thing too, because it's about finding out who you are as a writer And that journaling process is so helpful in helping us kind of understand ourselves better, right? And who we are, what unique skills and gifts and talents we bring to the table. You talked about just all the ways and times that your website changes. Well, our websites are a reflection of us, right? And so we're kind of trying on these different outfits to see like what works. And I think that it takes a little bit of trial and error. Like, so when you talk about this, and I know you're going to talk to us more about this tomorrow, but why do you think it's important to get that right? Why is it important to really get specific about who that reader is? Can't we just write for everybody? And like, I know that's a struggle, right? We all kind of feel like, oh, I don't want to leave anyone out. So talk to us about that. Like, why should that not be the way we write?
Yes, and I have heard that a lot. First of all, it is absolutely a journey of self-discovery. And there are so many things where writing brings to the surface the things that we struggle with on a personal level, right? Like the self-doubt, the do I really have anything to offer? Who am I? You know, the imposter syndrome, the inner critic, all those things kind of come down to, those are personal and in many times spiritual issues. So it is totally a journey of self-discovery. But with your other question, yeah, I think when we're specific, we know exactly what we're offering, and our readers know exactly what we have to offer them. And I've heard that a lot. Like, well, I don't want to hear anybody out. Everybody needs to hear what I have to say. So my answer to that is, okay, everybody actually might need to hear what you have to say, right? Like if you're talking about spending more time in prayer, eating more healthy, or getting more exercise or something like that. Like, I mean, who doesn't need to hear that, right? But you're not writing to everybody. You're writing to the person who realizes that they need that and are looking for an answer to that. Have you ever tried like telling someone they need to eat healthier? If they don't want to hear it, like they're not interested. That is not your reader.
Right.
And so we need to find that person who acknowledges that that's their need and that's what they're looking for the answer to. And if you think about it, I think about stores and I think about magazines. Like both of those are very targeted. Like if you think about magazines, Sports Illustrated is targeted towards generally men, but who want to learn about different athletes. And so I'm not going to go buy a Sports Illustrated if I want a brownie recipe, because I'm not going to find one there. But if I pick up a Sports Illustrated, I know exactly what I'm going to find. And in the same way, if I'm looking for a fancy pair of shoes, I know which store to go to. I'm not going to go to Walmart or whatever. You know what that store offers or what that magazine offers. And they're not short on readers or shoppers. It's more helpful because you know exactly what you're going to get when you go there. And so in the same way with our writing, if we have kind of positioned ourselves as this is the specific thing that I talk about, yeah, there's going to be some people that are like, yeah, that's not for me. But the people that it is for them are going to know exactly what they're going to get. And they're like, oh yeah, I want to go to that person because they talk about this topic and that's what I need right now. Because otherwise people are just going to keep scrolling if they don't know what you have to offer, because they don't know what they're going to get when they go there. Like if there's, there was a new set of stores in our town recently and I had never heard of them before. And so, my daughter and I went just to kind of scope them out because we didn't even know what they sold there. So normally if I didn't have free time, well, I'm not going to take the time to go in there because I don't know what I'm going to find, and I'm busy and I've got an agenda and I need to do this. And so if we're specific, it helps our reader know what they're going to find. And it also helps us to be able to really speak to that person directly and clearly. And we know what we're going to write about. You know, I hate being stuck in a blank screen going, what am I trying to accomplish again? But if I've got a specific reader in mind, then I'm like, okay, what does she need right now? What is she probably struggling with? This is my purpose statement of what I'm doing. How can I do that today for this person?
Yeah, I think so often I work in the marketing world. And so, you're talking about ideal reader, but in the marketing world, it's called like your avatar or your buyer persona. These are all different synonyms for the same thing we're talking about. And one thing that we talked about, I don't know if any of you were there on the webinar for to join this community, but we talked about becoming known for the problem that you solve. And this is the exact same overflow and outworking of that whole concept, is that you want to be known for the problem that you solve, and that all of our readers are coming to us at some point of transition. And like in that point of transition, like they're going from a point A problem of pain, and then you want to help get them from that point of pain or discomfort or change in their life, and be that voice that they think of to get them to that other side of that point of pain. And so Amy, for example, is kind of becoming known as that person that helps you figure out who your ideal reader is. You're in some sort of transition where you're like, who am I talking to? Why is this important that I figure this out? And when I think about that, I think about Amy. So she's becoming known for the problem that you solve. This kind of blends into some of the things I'm going to be teaching about this summer when we talk about our brands as writers. But this is so critical for not only establishing a brand, but really connecting with people, seeing like a real human person on the other side of your screen that you're really trying to talk to. And when you do that, your reader feels that connection, like, oh, this person, she gets me, she knows me. So I think that's so great. And I love your illustration about Sports Illustrated, right? Like that kind of gets to the heart of why we have to kind of change our own mindsets of, okay, maybe everyone should know about prayer, but not everybody wants to know about prayer. So therefore we need to really talk to that person. So I really appreciate that illustration.
Well, and I think it affects so many things, like what you're going to put in your Instagram bio, what your website is going to look like, what colors you use for your website, and the fonts and the verbiage that you put in there, what you're going to offer to people for a lead magnet to get them on your newsletter list, what you're going to write in your newsletter, like absolutely everything comes down to that. Someone was asking me about their website about page. You would think, well, that's the one place on your website you talk about yourself. It's like, well, kind of, but not really. You're still trying to gear that towards, yes, this is why I can help you with this problem that you have. And so really knowing who you're writing for and what you're offering them affects everything else that you do.
And it
It's sort of
affects
a
the
ground level.
language you use too. Like I think as writers, are you writing like in your example of writing to your young adult fiction book? You're going to talk differently in your writing there than you're going to write on your website, writing to Christian creatives who are wanting to figure out their ideal reader. So knowing your ideal reader really affects the writing level at which you're writing, and also like the intended audience. Where does this language need to land on that reader? So yeah, it affects everything from the words you choose to the colors, right? All of that is affected by that. So how do you, once you've identified that reader, how do you get to them? Maybe you could tell us a little bit how you've done that. Like, so what? So now that you know this, how does that help you as a Christian writer seeking to love God, love words, love your readers? So what? How does that work itself out in your experience?
Well, there's ways, of course, of reaching out online through social media platforms and things like that, and talking directly to your reader, and poking at those pain points, those felt needs, that sometimes the symptoms of what they're struggling with. But other times it can be meeting that person in real life. Kind of funny story for me. Like I said, I now lead my church's women's ministry. We've been involved in our church for probably 20 something years, and it's a decent sized church. And for many, many, many years, I had zero interest in being involved in the women's ministry. I was working with college students in one ministry, but no interest in going to women's events, retreat, any of that kind of thing. And, we'd be sitting in church and they would advertise some event coming up, and my husband would be like, "Oh, honey, you want to go?" I'm like, "Nope, not interested." And I think, there were a couple reasons for that. One was I kind of had the unfair preconceived idea that women's events were fluffy and stuff, and just not something that I was interested in. But that wasn't really fair to me, since I had never even been to one, to be able to evaluate that. But I think I was also struggling with my own kind of insecurity. I mean, I had my very small group of friends who also didn't go to women's events. And the idea of kind of an open social thing was like, yeah, not interested, don't want to. So as I started refining my writing message and realizing, I want to reach women and help them to grow in their faith, it sort of occurred to me / Holy Spirit went, hey, if you want to be reaching women, you go to this big church and they've got this big women's ministry and you have nothing to do with it. What if you started helping with that? It's like, oh, okay, fine. So I knew about myself that I was more likely to be slightly less uncomfortable if I actually had a job to do. And so I met with a woman who was leading the women's ministry at the time. And I didn't know it, but ironically, she, I'd been working with this college ministry for many years. She was an old college student from that ministry who was now leading the women's ministry at my church. So that was kind of funny. So I started
That
helping
makes you
out.
feel old, doesn't it?
What's that?
That makes you feel old, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. It's like, have I outgrown college ministry? I have college students now.
Yeah.
But so I started helping on the leadership team for kind of one school year, helping organize events and running events and things like that, and getting to know women. And then at the end of that season, the woman in charge was stepping down because she was pregnant, having her first child, and they asked me to lead it. So I went from having no interest in having anything to do with it to running the thing, which also fits in line. I'm kind of an administrative kind of person, and so I do enjoy, putting the events together and things like that. So, but that has been a really neat opportunity to get to know my reader face to face. I've led like breakout sessions on my spiritual formation topics, gotten into talking to the moms group at church. I was the main speaker at one of the women's events talking about my spiritual formation topics. And so that's been super helpful. And to actually, meet these people face to face. I just had a woman 2 days ago in church come up to me like, "Oh, I love your emails. Like, this was so cool about money and and just keep them coming." Like, how encouraging is that, to have a actual face to think of, like, okay, I'm writing for her because this helps her in her walk with God. That has been hugely helpful for me and encouraging, and just to be able to get to know that actual reader in person, face to face. And
Yeah, that's so cool. And oftentimes, if you've been, if you're familiar with this kind of training when it comes to finding your ideal reader or avatar, or whatever, often they tell you to name your person, give your person a name and a face. So like if you've ever had those encounters where you're meeting somebody in church who said, oh, I've really resonated with some of the things that you've written, like hold on to that. Like that's a real key thing in your own writing, that you can be like, this is for that person. This is for the Mary out there who has told me in the past, like this is reaching her where she's at. So and that's so great. So we've talked a lot about like, some of the aspects of knowing your reader and the overflow of it, and why it's important, because therefore, you need to hang out where your ideal reader is hanging out. Get over yourself and whatever preconceived notions you have about women's ministry, or maybe Facebook groups that your ideal reader might be hanging out in, or other online forums, either virtual or real. Like knowing who that reader is, you need to rub shoulders with that person, and get to know, like, what are their pain points, what are the things that they're struggling with, and where does my experience and expertise kind of connect? How can I help this person in that transition time? So we've covered a lot of that, but what else are you going to talk to us about tomorrow, that we can kind of look forward to?
Well, I plan to kind of give you all a path to either uncover who that reader is for the first time, or maybe just to narrow it down and hone it down a little more, who exactly you're writing for and what you have to offer them. Sometimes we think we're specific, but like Kara said, if I can still ask you 20 questions about well, what does this person need and where are they at, and what, then you might not be specific enough. So we'll talk about the roles that your gifts and your own strengths play, your life experiences, your passions and interests. And we'll talk about where that intersects with the needs that a specific reader has. So my hope is that you'll come away with a clearer understanding of how to figure out who that is that you're writing for, and what specifically it is that you have to offer them, how you can serve them.
That sounds so great. I'm excited to learn more from you on that. Yeah, so you guys, this has been super great. I hope you've enjoyed it, but let us know, like, you can unmute yourself and ask Amy. We've got a little extra time here, so do you have any questions about some of the stuff that we've talked about today? Either specific questions to your own reader, or how to find your ideal reader, maybe some questions you've had in the past about it. We're all ears.
So Amy, I know one time we were talking about a lot of times we write to a younger version of ourselves. How does that fit into your plan for identifying your ideal reader?
That's definitely part of it, because for so many of us, the things that we're passionate about, the things that are like, this is really important to me, because whatever it is that you're writing about, you want it to be sustainable, something that you really are passionate about, right? And that you're going to be able to sustain for a while. A lot of times those passions come from things that we've been through. And that's why we're passionate about them. Did you have a child go through cancer treatment? And so you're passionate about helping other parents navigate that because you know how hard it was for you. Or, you've been through whatever different life experiences you've had. Many times our reader is ourselves. What have we been through? What have we gotten to the other side of that now we want to turn around and help someone else? I think of the verse in, I want to say it's in one of the Corinthians about using that God comforts us
so that we can comfort others.
Wants us to comfort others with the same comfort that we've received from him. And so that's kind of the idea. I think that a lot of us, we look at those life experiences, and that's how one way that we can help to narrow down what it is that we have to offer based on what we've gone through ourselves.
Yeah, that's so good. None of our suffering is wasted, especially
Mhm.
for writers. Like, you can turn that suffering around to bless and minister to other people going through. Because I think that's one of the things too with suffering, right? Is like, you think you're the only one. You think it's unique to you. And so that's really great. I've wondered too, Amy, and maybe I've mentioned this to you before. Um, if you don't know your ideal reader, how much stock should you put into what your Google Analytics say your reader is? So often you can get a lot of information about who's already reading your stuff just based on Google. You know, gender, age, part of the country, some of those habits that we can kind of extract information from. So, what do you think about that? Do you think that should play a part in our discovery process, or and maybe if so, like, how much weight do you give that?
I think it's kind of a tension sometimes between what are other people gravitating towards, but also what am I really designed to write about? Like, I've heard stories of people who, like, they had a particular post go viral, but it wasn't really along the lines of what they were really passionate about writing for. Like, there has to be an overlap. If you think of like the Venn diagram thing, where it's what a reader wants, so maybe what your Google Analytics is telling you or which post went viral, but it also has to overlap with what you are passionate about and what you feel like God has designed you uniquely to offer. They both have to be true. Because, if everybody wants to read my post about, scuba diving or something, because I had one story that talked about that, but I'm really not passionate about scuba diving and don't really know any more than that one post that I put up there, that's not sustainable for you. So there's kind of a tension, I think, between finding that overlap of what is it that other people are resonating with that also is what I'm passionate about and God has uniquely designed me to offer. Does that?
Yeah, totally. I think that's really helpful. I think in my case, I was really surprised to learn that I have almost a 50-50 split of men and women reading my work. And so I've always really liked that. Like, I like that men will read my work, but it throws me a lot, because I'm like, I want this to reach, I'm a woman, so obviously I'm writing from a female perspective, but I've had some of my husband's coworkers tell me, I read every one of your posts. And I'm like, really? Like, why? So I think that whole male female thing has really, I've struggled with that. Like, do I need to pick one or the other? Or is this one of those things that, like, write for women, and if men get something out of it, praise God. But how much do I think about that? How much do I think, like, okay, what is my male audience going to think about this? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. And I mean, but you're getting a male audience without thinking about that. So, I mean, I'm thinking, do what you're doing, and you're good, because if you're shooting for this bullseye, you're going to catch people on the outer things still, And I think part of knowing our reader is also for us, so that we stay focused and, like you said, have that face of someone specific. It helps us to write. And if you're catching other people along the edges, then that's great. I don't think, but we can drive ourselves crazy, I think, trying to, like, please everybody. You know what I'm saying? But you're catching men by just doing what you're doing. So keep doing what you're doing.
Helpful. That's helpful.
And I mean, your website isn't like pink.
Right. It's not
You know what I'm
overtly
saying? It's a little
feminine.
more neutral.
Yeah. Yeah. That goes into it too. Yeah.
Yes. There are some websites that are pink. That
Yes.
might not catch the guys quite as much, but yeah.
For sure.
Just like Sports Illustrated has, I'm sure there are women who read Sports Illustrated because they like the articles.
Well, you know what? What is really fascinating, and I've read this somewhere, is that the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition has
Mhm.
just as many female readers as male, which is crazy, right? Because we would think of that as being so objectifying
Mhm.
and so degrading, which we could argue that it is.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think there's something in women that like I don't know. I can't, think too far into the motives behind that, but it does make you wonder, like, why is that so? That of all the issues of their magazine, that one gets just as much women readers as men. Isn't that interesting?
Well,
That's funny.
sadly, I think that the women that are reading that are wanting to look like those people in that magazine, which is
Right. That's my guess too. Yeah.
yeah,
Which is not going to help their mental state.
right.
So interesting.
I guess one of my
Mhm.
questions is, if you don't feel like you're an expert in anything, how do you figure out what you're providing or what you could provide for people?
Oh, that's a good question.
Like my experiences are all over the place. I too have my college degree is in animal science, and I've been a church secretary for 23 years. So, I'm just, God just put me on a completely different path than I thought I was going to go. And I don't know, what does that tell somebody else, in terms of my own experiences?
Well, first of all, I don't think you have to be an expert to have something to offer someone else. And sometimes the fact that you've been all over the place is something in and of itself. Like, you could talk about, how do you navigate pivots in your life? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can think outside the box sometimes and take a step back. And what is it what have you learned in your life? What is something that you're passionate about? Even if it's, I was talking to somebody in one of my classes once, and they were saying, well, I really just like to sit down and have coffee one-on-one and get to know people. And we talk about a whole variety of topics. I'm like, well, maybe that relational piece is the message itself, that, how do we cultivate, deep friendships with one another? How do you know what I'm saying? Like, so think sometimes outside the box, that it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm an expert in prayer, or I'm an expert in, this field or whatever. What is it that you're passionate about that people come to you about, or that you enjoy talking with about? Just reading Abigail's comment here.
Yeah, I could, and that went back to what Melissa talked about last week too. That just keeps coming back over and over, how just life-giving and encouraging, and just the gift we give if we notice something unique in another person's writing. That's the way I got acquainted with Kara. I just really appreciated the biblical content that she had, that was delivered in a really smooth way. Yeah, and I feel the other thing, and I was out working with a student for part of it, so you may have mentioned this, but again, sort of my lens is always through like this humility and meekness, and how that's a good thing. But when you said, and I quote, if they're not interested, they're not your reader. It seems obvious, but that's a humbling, like a little pill to swallow. And I wondered, did you talk about that, or just kind of, and I know that's unfolding as time goes along, but was that humbling to you when you really had to narrow down and realize some people aren't interested in this? For you, Amy?
Yeah, and I think that was in response to the idea that, well, everybody needs to hear what I have to say. It's like, well, they might need to hear what you have to say. That is possible. But just because someone needs something doesn't mean they want it. And we need to be writing for the people who acknowledge that that's their need. And yeah, I guess that can be humbling, that, yeah, not everybody, this isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea, which is fine because there are other people that this is what they need. And to, realize that, okay, this is how God has gifted me. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. And that's okay. But what am I doing with the gifts that God has given me? And like you were talking about, calling out the gifts we see in other writers, that's the thing in and of itself, being able to see those things in other people. That's a message to offer other people, of how do you do that?
I was gonna say to Kathy too, have you ever read the books by Austin Kleon? Steal Like an Artist? Have you heard of that book?
I have not read it, no.
It is so good, you guys. You can get it on Amazon. I got it on my Kindle. And I just highlighted that thing to death. And one of the things he said in there, basically his whole thesis is that only God creates. And so therefore everyone else, all we do is copy. You don't have to be original. Like you can take elements of styles and people that you admire and meld them together into something new that's uniquely Kathy, and that will combine all of those experiences that you have as a writer and will reach some reader, that's out there, which I thought was just super encouraging. But the other thing he said, which has been true of my experience, when you're trying to figure out where you want to lean into what lane you want to go as a writer, he said a lot of times the wisdom of the day is write what you know. And I felt this way too when I was starting. I don't know enough about anything to fill a whole blog full of and just keep writing it. Like I'm not a homesteader. I'm not a great homeschooler. I don't know, how to sew. Like I just didn't feel like I had this expertise. But he said, write the things that you want to read. And so I thought that was also really, really good. Like the things that you wish was out there, things that you're searching for on the internet, like the answers that you're longing for, right? Figure out what that is and write that down. That might be where you need to lean. Like that's what Holy Leisure became the thing for me, because I was like, oh, what does that mean? I want that. I'm going to figure out what that means. It's not because I knew it all. It's exactly because I didn't. So I just wanted to offer that, and as just an encouragement.
Yeah.
You don't have to know you're an expert in something to actually go forth and write. I think not being an expert is qualification enough.
I tend to put the cart before the horse too, like I'm like, well, I don't have a platform. Nobody's offered me a national speaking tour. Well, just publish this week's blog post,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Just be
One thing at
faithful
a
in
time.
that.
Yeah, I like that. Like, what are the sermons you love to hear? The books you like to read? Like, what is it? Like for me, I loved the idea of getting below the surface to the root of issues. Like that always just kind of excites me, and so what are those things that really are like, yeah, I want to hear more of that. I want to read more of that. I want to listen to more of that. The thing that you're passionate about.
I've written a lot of things that were like little stories of things that had happened in my life that maybe I learned something from that I could turn into a little message, because I do devotionals. But now I've gotten to where sometimes I'll do more about experiences or different things, or even like from being on Facebook and seeing what people are writing about. And then I'm kind of like getting ideas of things. Oh, somebody would like to hear about that. But like right now, I tend to give my books away a lot. So I have a lot of guys that read them too, but it's because either their wife got it or, they're related to me or, so I'm not really sure. But like, I'm thinking right now of a particular person at church that he recently lost his wife. And when they had for their ministry kind of thing, they have this red barn that they have access to that we would go and sing have hymn sings on some of the Saturday nights. And so when I went the first time, after that, I wrote a devotion that I put out, and I gave her a copy of it with my first book, but she's since passed away. So I want to give him a copy of it in the book now that, to kind of remind him that I'm thinking of her and the experiences that we had. So I never know what's going to happen, but like I've just given them out to my son's music teachers in the past. And one of them he was like, hey, I really like your books, and I gave him one, and then I gave him the other two. And at that point, but he was like, here's a CD. Yeah, I'm just using them as coasters. Like he has written, he's made all these music CDs. And then after the last two, he's like, here, I'm gonna give you this better one. Cause like one that he likes even better that he had made. So you don't know how people are going to look at it or who's going to be affected by it. But I think the more you go out there and write and try something, the more you're going to see who it affects, and especially if it's touching you. And that's the thing. I have to put out what I believe he wants, and that it's touching me or what I kind of need at the time. And then sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if this ain't good. But then later I'm like, well, it wasn't too bad. Or I'll have to ask, you might have to ask somebody if, what they think. Cause I have to ask my family sometimes, does this even make any sense at all?
Yeah, sometimes it makes sense in our own heads, right? It's true. Yeah, I liked Amy's illustration of, like if you're aiming for that target, you might get some collateral movement or whatever you want to call it with that. As we write, you're going to pick up others, but knowing who that ideal reader is will really help us gain clarity in our own writing, our own purposes behind our writing. All of these teachings kind of overlap and intertwine with each other, with Janet and Melissa's last two gatherings as well. So,
and it was funny when I was listening to Melissa's last week, a lot of times that if you have that life vision statement, that overflows into, okay, well, along those same lines, that's also what I have to offer to a reader.
yeah.
And the more that those things can all kind of overlap and connect, the more, I don't know, it just makes more sense to me that like, yeah, this is how I'm wired. This is how God uses me. Now this is how I'm going to write on these same sorts of things, because that's how God uses me. That's the way that I'm wired.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that journaling process is so important. I've been journaling a lot since Melissa's talk, kind of working through some of those things too, refining my vision statement, because I think that helps us as we refine who our reader is and get real clear on our message. So good stuff. Are there any other questions you want to lob over at Amy before we sign off today? Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I would just encourage you to, as the week goes on, as you think about who this ideal reader is, I'm just going to offer this service from Amy. Ask her questions and she'll come back with better questions. So I think that she's great at kind of digging deeper into that if you're kind of wrestling with who your ideal reader is. I had a thought the other day. I was going through doing some training for Mighty Networks, and they have a whole Mighty Networks about slow runners. Like the whole purpose of that Mighty Network and that community is just to talk to people who are the runners at the back of the pack. And so that's an example of having an ideal person you're trying to reach in a community, and also an ideal person you're trying to reach as a writer. It can be anything and anyone. I mean, if just think of all of the little niches of content that are available today. So there's so much opportunity for us as readers or as writers. You can just niche down. And we talk about that word niching, meaning just finding that little spot
Mhm.
of that ideal reader and what that person is looking for and writing to that person. So I think it'll be a really good exercise for us this week. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Replay will be up shortly and we'll see you guys again tomorrow, same time, same place. All right. Take care.